it's incredibly significant how often one reaches back on one's own experience, and I find that helpful in several ways. Occasionally it can get kind of overwhelming, but it's helpful because ultimately you've sort of walked in their shoes. And what I like to say to them is, if you think you've made a mistake, I've made all these mistakes already. So let's talk about them, and there's no judgment from my side. So that, I think, really helps.
For me, having a corporate career before coming to coaching was very useful because it gives me context and empathy for the person that I'm coaching. When somebody meets you for the first time and they realise that you have worked within a large organisation where there's politics, different dynamics at work, constant change and unhappy people, including yourself for some reason. So, very useful as a starter.
It was certainly really important, especially at the outset. I rocked up in the coaching world pretty young, and having had a pretty rapid ascent in my own career, and that being financial services and economics, was really valuable for two reasons. One, of course, it means that I can step inside their shoes, we can talk about real examples. They will often pick your brains for specific examples, and I always say I'm an open book, I'm happy to share. So being able to relate to the challenges that they face, never dismissing something that might sound otherwise from the outside perspective, it could seem like a small challenge. Having been in those shoes, you know that that stuff is really important, and you can really validate that as well as give alternative ways of looking at things and open up perspectives.
I think my corporate career makes me a better coach. It's that corporate experience that's taught me about leadership. So I have lived experience of leading myself, and I have lived experience of working with very senior leaders in very large organisations. What it means is that I get the business. I understand where the business is heading, what it's trying to do, the business's strategy, and how this leader's role fits in with what they're trying to achieve overall. We can link all the work we're doing into the context of the organisation, and we can just frame it in a way that we know is adding value to both the individual and to the client. So that commerciality that comes from my corporate career, I think is a fundamental pillar and part of how I operate.
I think having a senior corporate career is really, really important in terms of how effective I can be as a coach. I think it enables me to make a massive shift in terms of how I operate with people I coach. I think at one level people want to work with someone who has walked in their shoes, who's experienced probably some of the challenges they've already experienced, and actually can speak from experience. So I think it gives me an extra strand to work with, and it's probably a really big strand to work with.
My previous career as a doctor has massively influenced how I am as a coach, for good and for ill, if I'm honest. I think one of the good things about having been a doctor is I cannot be shocked by anything. So I have had lots of people who have had to share some really traumatic things, some very stressful things, and they may often say to me things like, "I bet you didn't expect to hear that." And I can always reassure them that I have heard something similar. And I think the other thing that being a doctor has given me is a very deep understanding of our brains and neuroscience. So I can really help people to appreciate how our brains work, the interaction between our brains and our bodies, and therefore that's how we think, how we feel, and then that influences how we behave. And so that's really helped, and I have found that many leaders actually really like that scientific approach.
I really think it does make a big difference because you've been there. You've been in tricky senior level executive meetings. You've made the mistakes and suffered for them sometimes. So, and you've also, of course, observed people who do things really well. And so I hope I'm able to ask the right questions, really strong, pertinent, challenging questions that are going to get them thinking, and help them to come up with different approaches, different ways of doing things. I don't think I'd be able to do that if I hadn't sat in that boardroom and been on that ladder working the way up to that position.
I think there's also a sense that sometimes they actively want me to take off the coaching hat and give them my take on a situation. And because I've been in a lot of those situations, they haven't changed that much despite my age, then I'm able to say, look, I'm going to take my hat off, I'm going to tell you something, then I'm going to put my hat back on again. And so it enables me to sort of recontract into a different, slightly different relationship. And they seem to really warm to that. And I think finally, I'm always sitting on their side. Because I've been there and I've walked in their shoes, I always feel that there is a level of empathy there that would be hard to get if you hadn't sat in a similar situation to them.
That when clients ask for it or are open to it, I can provide some input. I don't need to be a silent coach. My practice is more about ensuring that the client is making the decision, but if I have some richness of input to provide, I'm happy to. So I'm happy to share an example from my experience or from the experience of other leaders in other industries and how they might see or approach something. And that, I think, just makes for an even higher quality conversation.
Sometimes I will use mentoring during the coaching process. For example, recently there was somebody I was coaching who wants to know how to speak more strategically. So I have a model and a technique and skills for that. Some specific stories, and we practiced it together, and the coachee found that very helpful for a senior meeting that they're going into the next day.
And as a consultant, I just saw so many different businesses. And so I think whenever a client will bring something to me and they want to perhaps also be able to soundboard something more technical, I'm always happy to sit there and say, no, just explain that to me a little bit more clearly. I'm used to picking things apart. And so I think they can feel like they're having a really rounded conversation with me and that they can bring whatever they need to me.
One piece that has influenced my coaching is Brené Brown's take on Roosevelt's Man in the Arena. So what she's saying is that if you're outside the arena, you're not allowed to criticize, right? If you're in the arena, you're living it, you're breathing it, you're actively part of it. Like, that's where the opinion counts, that's where the opinion matters. And I think that if as a corporate leader, you know that your coach has been in the arena, there's a little bit of credibility that comes with that.
And for me actually, and maybe I'm a little bit radical here, I feel the conventional definition of coaching is very, very narrow. I think no one shows up purely just to be coached. People actually show up to be supported and to be assisted in the challenges facing them. So for me, actually coaching can go into more of a mentoring area if that's appropriate for an individual. It can be into more of a pure coaching area, but fundamentally I think what people are looking for is a thought partner, someone who can actually really develop and evolve and help them evolve their own thinking. So I think we need to redefine the breadth of coaching and the power of coaching.